What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the Fantastic Four. Now, some of what we're going to talk about in this video in the beginning will be important maybe to a degree later on. Everything in the second half is ridiculously important, and it's amazing at the same time. Okay, so here's the thing. What this does is this initially opens up with basically Reed Richards addressing what's called the Singularity Project. And the whole idea behind this is that Reed Richards had formed this at a previous point in time to bring together the world's brightest minds, right? The most bright and most intelligent individuals for solving various problems. The issue with this is it's kind of like the Sir Ken Robinson lecture, right? Where he talked about how the biggest issue with education in the modern era is that it strips individuals of creativity and it replaces it with logic and reason, which is not an inherently bad thing, but that lack of balance is what really prevents humanity from achieving incredible things. And that's Reed Richards' stance here, that as time has gone on, he's become disillusioned with the Singularity Project, because instead of focusing on things of like what humanity can do, reaching for the stars and like colonizing the solar system and so on and so forth, these individuals are using their intelligence to write articles and talk about the impending end of humanity, overpopulation, economic inequality, different things along those lines. And in the mind of Reed Richards, while those things are relatively important, the reality here is that Reed Richards thinks beyond the average person, right? A small-minded person thinks in a small-minded way. And so they focus only on humanity in relation to its existence on Earth. What Reed Richards wants is a group that can focus on humanity in relation to extending beyond that, right? Like a small-minded person is worried about today, a big-minded person is worried about tomorrow. And that's really what he tells them here, right? You're all small people because you all think small. This entire thing is a failure. And so he ultimately ends up resigning and walking away. What he does instead is he comes to this realization, the ability to think outside the box, right? That it really does come from kids. It's the example of the elephant in the refrigerator. If any of you guys ever heard that story, it was basically this guy who essentially started going around to like adults and kids and trying to discern the difference between like creativity and kind of building off the studies of Sir Ken Robinson regarding like education and its failures and so on. So what he would do is he would walk up to adults and he would say, I want to put an elephant in a refrigerator. What do I do? And the adults would say things like, well, you shrink the elephant down, or you make a gigantic refrigerator that you can fit the elephant in. But the kids would say things like, lure it in there with a piece of cheese or something like that, or put a mouse behind it and scare it in, or just push it in. But kids would not give any thought to the logistics of how to physically fit an elephant into a refrigerator. They would just think of how it could be done. And that ability to think outside the box is what makes kids unique. And that's what Reed Richards is shooting for, right? Again, small-minded adults, big-minded kids. So what he ends up doing is forming the Future Foundation, which is basically the world's smartest kids, because they can think outside the box. They can think in a way that adults simply just can't do, because adults are guided by their own experiences, right? So a cynical adult will write a series of cynical articles no matter how intelligent they are. And so this gives birth to the formation of the Future Foundation. And that's the Future Foundation part of the story. Everything else is just like really cool stuff that happens. Okay, so here's the thing. One of the first things that happens here, and it's not even a really significant moment, but it's kind of a cool small little moment. And this is important for a couple different reasons. One is because of the nature of Franklin Richards' powers, but the other is the relationship between Franklin and Reed. That what you have here is an instance where there's like this big toy event that's going to be put on by a villain named Arcade. But Reed was supposed to take Franklin and his friend Leech. Reed ultimately reneges on his promise in order to work with the Future Foundation. Now, Reed's there with Franklin, but he doesn't pay a lot of attention to him. He doesn't really focus on him. And that's going to be an on-running theme, especially when Galactus comes to visit Reed, madder than he's ever been in his whole life. And then they talk about Franklin, because the reality here, and a little bit of a spoiler for this, with Franklin Powers being woken up, it scares the piss out of Galactus. It's amazing. It's just one of those ridiculously awesome moments in the comic. It's so cool when they have that conversation. But the thing about this is that because of the fact that Reed basically reneges on his promise, Johnny Storm ends up taking Franklin instead. Now, when they get there, of course, Johnny recognizes Arcade. Arcade has historically been a villain that basically creates death traps, death mazes. Johnny's kind of suspicious of all of this. Arcade has sort of turned over a new leaf to a degree, but he's also working with Impossible Man. Now, we do have a video, a Beyond Omega level video on Impossible Man. This guy's ridiculously powerful. He can take on the shape of virtually anything he wants and give himself virtually any superhuman power. There are limitations. So if he turns himself into like Thor's hammer, for example, he doesn't take on the ability of Thor's hammer to only be lifted by those who are worthy. Any swinging dick can just pick it up. You know what I mean? So like, that's kind of how it works with Impossible Man, but the guy's just ridiculously OP. He is, by all standards of measurement, Marvel's version of Mr. Mxyzptlk, for those of you guys who are coming from DC Comics. So the thing about this is that it's really just kind of them working together to a degree and Arcade kind of turning over a new leaf, but also setting up like a little bit of a death trap where he tries to mess with Impossible Man. Things kind of pop off to a degree, but what ends up happening is that Franklin basically dealing with this in the moment. The toys of Mr. Impossible, which were created as death traps by Arcade, those are destroyed by Johnny Storm. The reason why this is important for Franklin is because the last time we saw him use his powers, he had created like a pocket universe in his bedroom. Now his powers are more fine-tuned. He brings a stuffed dinosaur to life, which attacks Arcade. Now, it's not the most important thing, and it's not the most grand display of Franklin's powers, but what I hope you guys notice here is he's gaining more control over his abilities, and there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that during the actual Future Foundation comic book run, because there comes a point where what Jonathan Hickman does is like, we'll cover the next story arc for Fantastic Four, which is called 3, which is amazing, but what that does is it switches over to what's called the Future Foundation, and that will actually explore how Franklin has learned to master his abilities, which is really cool. It's a really cool run. But the important thing here is that what this does is, of course, it allows them to kind of save the day and sort of go forward from there. But another thing that's not important at the moment, but will become important later, is that Reed Richards kind of opened the floor to the Future Foundation to give them like their first real task, right? Their first real group project. The end result of their group project was finding a way to cure Ben Grimm. Now, they can't do it permanently, and in fact, they actually outsmarted Reed Richards, where what Reed tried to do was revert Ben Grimm back to his human form, but what they realized is because Ben Grimm had been fundamentally changed due to his exposure to the cosmic rays in the Fantastic Four's origin, that Reed Richards can stretch, Susan Storm can create force fields and make herself invisible, Johnny Storm can set himself on fire, but they do that because they have basically an on-off switch. They can use their powers or not use their powers. Ben Grimm is in a perpetually on switch, so what they do is they give him a temporary off switch. 1 week every year, he can go back to being human. The funny thing about this, and what's really crazy, is that there's actually going to be a caveat to this, and it's not even something anybody here can predict. And in fact, it's going to be something that by the time they realize what's going on, really Reed himself, by the time he realizes the caveat to this kind of cure, it'll be too late to do anything about it. It's actually really sad, but really happy at the same time. It's kind of an emotional roller coaster to a degree, but of course, they end up presenting him basically with this formula, and that's basically it. Now, this is when we switch over to the really cool stuff. Okay, so what we do here is we switch over to what is basically adult Franklin Richards. If you guys recall, in our previous videos, we had talked about how this guy had appeared out of nowhere and basically went into the Baxter building, woke up Franklin's powers, had a conversation with Valeria, and then left. So this is where he comes back to, right? This is him coming back to his own, to wherever it was that he was at. And in reality, it's at the very end of time. What they're in is basically a kind of pocket reality that Franklin Richards himself made as an adult. So we're basically dealing with two versions of Franklin. There's the adult Franklin Richards, which we're talking about here. Then there's, of course, the kid Franklin Richards in the present era. This adult Franklin is at the very end of the time stream, right? The very end of all things. And what he says is, okay, I completed my mission. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. At which point, it's now Valeria's turn to jump into the time stream. But the other thing that goes on here is that once Valeria takes off, Franklin actually starts building a kind of dimensional barrier. Quite literally, the powers of Franklin Richards at this point in time are so astronomically powerful, he can actually hold off the universe itself. The entire universe collapsing in on itself, or at least a kind of cascading time stream where things are changing, and somebody being able to hold all that off. So this is an insane level of power, right? And here's the crazy thing, it's not even as powerful as he's going to be. He's going to become more powerful as time goes on. It's nuts. That's why I tell you guys, man, dude, Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, son, it's a whole different thing. But what's crazy is that Franklin kind of doing this on his own, he's literally here while you end up having Nathaniel, who jumps back into the time stream as well. Of course, Nathaniel Richards being the father of Reed. Yes, he's here. We'll find out what he's been doing in this video. But one of the other things that I also want you to kind of keep in the back of your head, in this moment here, where Franklin's in this place by himself, this is going to tie into the Future Foundation comic. So that's something that I want you to just remember here. What we end up doing is actually jumping back to the college years of Reed Richards. That's where Nathaniel Richards goes, right? He goes back to the years when Reed was in college. Now, the funny thing about this is that this was actually something that was covered in Fantastic Four issue number 272. It's actually being changed changed here a little bit by Jonathan Hickman. So you can kind of ignore that original story, all of you guys who are super old school, reading the Fantastic Four from way back then. If you're new to Fantastic Four, it doesn't matter to you, right? So don't worry about that. But the thing about this is that, of course, Reed meets with his father. And again, the last time that Reed saw Nathaniel was when we covered the time that Nathaniel left here in our Fantastic Four coverage on Comics Explained. That's the last time we've seen him, when he was a little kid. And so seeing his father again is cool. And there's a lot of catching up to do. And he's like, how in the world did you, like, what have you been doing all this time? What's been going on? Now, this is cool because this is when we start getting into the stuff with King the Conqueror. One of the things that I want to establish here, and I want to make clear, as you guys probably notice, King the Conqueror's name is Nathaniel Richards. This guy's name is Nathaniel Richards. No, they are not the same person. It's literally just Nathaniel Richards, King the Conqueror, inheriting his name in the same way that I'm Robert Jefferson III, right? My dad was a junior, my granddad was a senior, right? It's just that kind of a thing. So what ends up going on here is we end up learning that when Nathaniel took off into the time stream, it was because he was kind of part of his own Council of Reeds to a degree. And what had been going on here is that there was a member of himself, one of those guys out there who had basically contained quantum energy to a degree, right? The ability to navigate through time. It ended up taking the combined efforts of the various Nathaniels from across the multiverse to bring this guy down. But when he was destroyed, they were all basically imbued with his ability to travel through time. What ended up happening here is when that happened, they were all basically met by Immortus and the Time Variance Authority. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, Immortus is a version of King. It's ridiculously confusing. It's overly complicated. If you guys are interested, I can make a video that explains the differences between King the Conqueror, Immortus, Ramatut, Iron Lad. I can do that if that's what you guys want, if you think it'll make it easier for you to understand. And honestly, it'll probably help, given the fact that we're getting Kang in the MCU. We may end up seeing some of those characters. But the thing about this is that Immortus is just basically a version of King the Conqueror, is really all it is. He doesn't share the same desire to conquer everything. He just kind of oversees the time stream. But what he realizes is that, again, with the TVA trying to ensure that the time stream doesn't spin out of chaos and so on and so forth, having thousands of individuals who are all just variants of themselves being able to jump around the time stream would create all kinds of chaos. And so what Immortus does is he says, either I can destroy all of you now, or you can go into the Great Hunt. And what that will do is it's literally all of you tracking each other down. And the last man standing is the one who gets to live. And that's it. And that's what happens. Literally, it's a cat and mouse game. They're chasing each other all throughout the time stream, trying to kill each other, right? Trying to eradicate each other. And that's literally what Nathaniel's been dealing with. He's just been running from all of his counterparts this entire time. And there's only one counterpart left. There's only one version of himself that exists out there. And so what he's literally done here is come and meet Reed for the purpose of having Reed help him destroy his counterpart. Now, of course, Reed realizes he can't do it on his own. And so what he does is he goes and he visits his college rival, who we know to be Victor Von Doom. Dr. Doom. Now, this is before he becomes Dr. Doom, right? Before he gets his face is all scarred and he becomes like the demigod, dictator, ruler, warlord, amazing one-line giver to all of us, right? That guy, the guy who delivers the best one-liners ever. And so with them working together, again, we're kind of fast-tracking through this a little bit so we can get to the really cool stuff. But what they do is they basically work together and they ultimately end up tracking down the counterpart version of Nathaniel himself. Now, the reality here is they're able to overcome this guy. Is kind of what we would expect. They're able to overcome and overpower this dude, take him out quite readily. The thing about this, though, is that Nathaniel cannot bring himself to kill his counterpart. And so what ends up going on here is Dr. Doom does it instead. Now, this is important because what Dr. Doom says is he tells Reed and he tells Nathaniel, I want you to remember this moment because a time will come when I will call on you for a favor. I will call on you for help and you will help me because I helped you here, because I literally solved this problem for you. That's going to become stupendously important. And so what ends up happening is you basically have Nathaniel who teleports away to meet back with Franklin again. Now, this is when we get to the super important stuff. And this is when this leads into what's arguably, not even arguably, definitively, not objectively, into the best moment ever in the history of Marvel Comics. Son. Man, I can't wait until we get to it. Oh my God. It's just like the best moment ever. Oh my God, like, I'm sorry, I'm so excited, people. But it is an exciting point in this story. It is really amazing. And I love it so much. Okay, so what we end up doing is we switch over to Valeria Richards, right? When Valeria travels back to the present day and meets with Susan. Now, I want you to remember this conversation. This is going to be incredibly important later on. So what ends up happening here is Valeria teleports to Susan. Susan doesn't know it's Valeria, right? It's a time condition red, right? Somebody's literally entering the Baxter building through the time stream, and Susan attacks Valeria. Now, right off the bat, Valeria's just like, okay, mom, let me have some of that tea. And that's when Susan realizes it's Valeria. So the two of them start talking here, right? This conversation's so awesome because what happens is that there's a little bit of, kind of like, hey, mom, you look great. It's awesome to see you again. Wow, Valeria, you really grew up, and, you look beautiful as a young woman, and so on and so forth, right? All that kind of, hey, we're getting to know each other. And then Susan asks the question, why are you here? Now, this explanation from Valeria happens at the same time that Nathaniel basically travels back to Franklin. Now, for what Franklin does here, and this is something that's kind of important, we'll talk about that here in a second. What Valeria says is this, right? She says, it would be best if you did not view me as the bearer of bad news. What I'm going to tell you is not subjective, mother. It's not a potential course of action. It's already happened, right? And more importantly, there's nothing you can do to change it. So it's crucial that you get past denial and simply focus on listening. And she says, will you do that for me? And the response to Susan is yes. And so what Valeria says here is she says, after the last war, when all reality has collapsed into a single time stream and the heat death of everything is imminent, there is a white space where your son sits, waiting for the new future we've created to overtake him. There, post-collapse, he acts as an anchor for the changes he's made. And when I return to him, I will serve that very same function regarding mine. We cement this new future that we have created with sacrifice. Mother, Franklin and I will die doing this. And so Susan immediately is like, no, I can't accept this. I won't, because she's literally being told by her daughter, me and your son are going to die. But again, she responding the way that a mother would. That's when Susan steps in and she says, no, you have to focus. You have to put your emotions to the side here. You can't focus on denial. You can't focus on trying to stop this. It doesn't work that way, right? However, there is a chance to save us, right? She says, we're running out of time and you have to focus. There are things you need to know. And literally Susan interrupts her, right? And she's like, how do you even know that what you're doing will work, right? You're just like your father, thinking you can solve everything. And the response of Valeria is, actually, no, right? She says, I'm probably one of the smartest people that has ever lived, but this was not my idea. It was all Franklin's idea. He's the one that figured it out. And so Valeria says, time's almost up. She says, I don't want you to do what it is that you're going to do. Her response, the response of Valeria is, it's already done. And now for the knowledge, right? This is the part that's going to be ridiculously important because this is going to be echoed at a future point in time, right? She says, the coming days are going to be dark and full of loss. It will feel like everything is going to break apart, that it will shatter and everything will end. And she says, only you can hold us together. Can you be strong, mother? Stronger than you've ever been before. There will be a moment when you're going to want to give up, a moment when you're going to want to let go. When you reach that point, look into the sky, look up, and remember the price that was paid. That is going to be incredibly important because the best moment ever in Marvel Comics is when that's gonna come back. Anybody who knows anything about Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, y'all know what I'm talking about, son. Y'all know what I'm talking about, man. I can't wait till I can't wait till we get to that point, man. Man, it's gonna be absolutely crazy, son. It's gonna be absolutely crazy. Now, as for Franklin, this is what was going on with Nathaniel, right? Once Nathaniel jumps back to where Franklin is, and Franklin asks him, did you take care of your counterpart? The response to Nathaniel is yes, and Franklin's like, good. He cracks a hole in the time stream and tries to dump Nathaniel through it. Now, Nathaniel does not initially know why Franklin's doing this, right? He's like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I can't use my powers. I can't travel through time. The response of Franklin is, I shut off your access to your powers. I took away your ability to use your powers. I'm going to dump you into the time stream, and who knows where you're going to end up, but I'm pretty sure you'll find a way. Like, you'll find some way to survive and some way to return. Quite literally, what Franklin's doing is removing Nathaniel from the equation. And when the question's asked by Nathaniel, why are you doing this? The response of Franklin is, because you and your variants that are out there, you're responsible for the Council of Reeds. You're the ones who made them, and you're the one who broke my dad. The reality reality is all those different versions of Reed Richards who were out there in the multiverse that joined the Council of Reeds, it was so easy for them to abandon their families and focus on solving the problem of everything because you abandoned them. I don't want you hopping and skipping through the timeline and screwing everything up. I have a very meticulously laid plan on how this is going to work, and you are too much of a variable to allow you to run around and do anything. You can't stay here because then you'll try to move around or something like that, and I need to be here for my own particular purpose, and you can't be moving through the time stream. So literally he just shuts off his powers, kicks him out, and he just ends up landing somewhere out there in the time stream. Now the cool thing about this is we're actually going to see, or we're gonna learn about Nathaniel encountering some amazing time streams along the way. Like he ends up coming across Days of Future Past, but what ends up happening is once Valeria comes back, she's like, okay, is everything done? And the response of Franklin is yes. Nathaniel is no longer part of the equation. He's out there in the time stream. Who knows what he's doing, and he probably won't be able to gain his or use his powers in any capacity because I shut them off. And so what they say is okay, because like what's literally happening right now is this pocket reality that Franklin's built, it's collapsing, right? Like the pressure of the universe in the time stream is simply too much. That as powerful as he is in being able to hold it off, he can't hold it off permanently. And so what they're hoping for, right, in the actions that they've taken, what they're hoping for is this, right? Using the example that we use in the King the Conqueror video, right, where we talked about like a meteor hitting Earth and like a tidal wave, them going back in time and basically making these changes, having these discussions, saying these things, that is creating changes to the time stream. And what they're hoping, and there's no way to even know for sure if it's going to work, what they're hoping is that this quote unquote tidal wave of change across the time stream, once it hits them and washes over, when they jump into the time stream and they land in the present day, they're hoping it worked. They're hoping that their statements and their actions were heard and that they can save the day. And so literally what they do, right? This is ridiculously important. What they do is they jump into the time stream. Where they come out, if you've read Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four before, you know exactly where they come out. They come out at the best moment ever in the history of Marvel Comics. I can't wait until we get there. We'll get there soon, probably in the next few weeks. I know a lot of you guys are like, no, I want to know now. I promise it's worth the wait, because the next story we cover, that's when one of the members of the Fantastic Four dies. This guy goes out like a man. Oh my God, dude, this guy goes out like a hero. It's absolutely amazing. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.